Well, now we'll be talking about wine, and certainly something that I enjoyed talking about. After all, I do come from France, and it is well known that we French people care only about two things in life, and one of them is wine. Well, wine is not the most popular alcoholic beverage in the world. Beer is, but there is something special with respect to wine. If you have a beer among your friends, you don't talk about its aroma or its bouquet. You don't talk about whether or not it has a great body. But this is what you do with wine. And wine is certainly the most talked about alcoholic beverage in the world. Well, one thing though for sure, the consumption of wine is going up all around the world. All around the world except for one country, and this country is France. Interestingly enough, the consumption of wine has been going down in France, but still France consumes quite a bit of wine, and here are some of the two leaders in terms of wine consumption, France and Italy. Actually, Italy is catching up on France, and I've been told then when Italy is going to overtake France, a national day of mourning will probably be declared in France. But actually France, there are other countries besides France where more wine is drunk. For instance, Luxembourg, 49.1 as compared to 45.6. But the overall number one wine drinker in the world per capita in terms of country is the Vatican at 62.2 liters per person. How do other countries compare? Well, Canada, which you see much less, 11.7, and the US, 10.5. For those of you who know Canada, it's interesting to note that the province or the place where most wine is drunk in Canada is Yukon. Far north. I think they need a little bit of distraction there for these long winter nights. Well, what about wine and health? Well, on the Canary Island, apparently, when a child comes of age, he's immersed in a vat full of wine, and wine is sprinkled over his or her body to actually provide for good health. Well, what can one say about wine in terms of, for instance, nutrition? Well, wine contains calories. Most of them come from the alcohol, and a glass of wine, let's say 140 milliliter or 5 ounces, is approximately 125 calories. In terms of other nutrients, well, it's really minimal. For instance, it contains some niacin, vitamin B3, some pantothenic acid, some pyridoxine, but once again, the amounts are extremely small. You would, to fulfill your required daily allowance of niacin, you would have to drink 10 bottles a day. And that's why French people really take this very seriously. Well, talking about the French and wine drinking, you may have heard of what's known as the French paradox. In France, they have, even though, you know, in terms of nutrition, they do a lot of things that are wrong. For instance, they eat a lot of butter, a lot of cheese, saturated fat. They smoke a lot, they have high blood cholesterol level. But nevertheless, they have the lowest incidence of heart disease of all the industrialized nations in the world, except for Japan. And some people have claimed that this has to do with the wine. And a book was written on this called The French Paradox. Well, there is no doubt that alcohol per se is beneficial, at least in theory. Alcohol, and no matter from where it is found, increases the levels of the good cholesterol, the HDL cholesterol. So this could be a factor. But what about the wine? Does the wine hold a special place? Well, a study was carried out in Denmark involving over 10,000 participants. And the reason why Denmark was picked up is that in Denmark, you know, the choices of alcoholic beverages varied. Some people drink beer, some people drink wine, some people drink liquor, and some people do not drink at all. And what they found from this study is that the people that drank the wine did the best in terms of overall mortality as compared to all the others. So there is something maybe that is beneficial. Well, actually, when I heard about this study, I rushed to Denmark with my son to check it firsthand. Well, what is the science associated with this concept that wine would be beneficial? Well, you already heard about resveratrol, which is an antioxidant. An antioxidant that is found most specifically in wine and most specifically in red wine. Well, as I've told you, there is the good cholesterol, the HDL cholesterol that we know about, but also we have to deal with the bad cholesterol, the LDL cholesterol, low density lipoprotein cholesterol. So we have the good, the bad, and then we have the ugly, which is the oxidized LDL cholesterol. And it seems that wine, because of its presence, or I should say resveratrol, actually prevents the oxidation of LDL into its oxidized form. And the oxidized form is the one that is associated with plaque that lines the arteries. So in that, at least in theory, one would explain why resveratrol is beneficial, because it is a good antioxidant. Well, this theory, though, has problem, because antioxidants are found in other food or as a drink than wine. And in fact, when it comes to the French diet, it's very different from our diet when it comes, among other things, to antioxidant. French people eat a lot of fruit and vegetable, good source of antioxidant. And in France, I remember from when growing up in France, you never finish a meal with a sweet dessert. Usually you finish, unless it's a special occasion, you finish with some fruit. And it could be the antioxidant in fruit that is important. Also, French people eat much more slowly than we do, and this could be a factor. For instance, there is a claim that the reason why French people do better is because when they drink wine, they eat more slowly and the food is more easily metabolized. But whatever, it should be mentioned, though, that French people do not live longer. It is true that a lower incidence of heart disease. It just happened that they die from other diseases, such as cirrhosis of the liver. Well, you may have heard also in a previous lecture that resveratrol, studies with resveratrol in mice have shown that mice on a diet of a high-calorie diet who take resveratrol supplement do better. So it might be true, but on the human scale, what would that represent? How much wine would one have to drink? Well, roughly the equivalent of 1,500 bottles of wine a day. And this is probably the reason why in France they start drinking early in the morning. Well, what about the negative effect of drinking? Not only of wine, but just the idea of alcohol. Well, the problem with alcohol is that, wine and other alcohol, is that it leads to the production of acetaldehyde. What happens is that ethanol gets metabolized by the body to form acetaldehyde, which eventually goes to acetic acid. If you drink too fast, what happens, the enzyme that converts acetaldehyde into acetic acid cannot do its job, and you get a buildup of acetaldehyde. And at least some of the effect of drinking too much are associated with high level of acetaldehyde. Now, when it comes to wine, in addition to the buildup of acetaldehyde, there are some other components present in wine that can lead to unpleasant after effect. And one of them is histamine. Wine that are rich in histamine tend to give more of an unpleasant effect. Like you may have heard of, among other things, the red wine headache. So it might be a good idea to stay away from, if you're sensitive, to stay away from wines that are rich in histamine. And among wines that are rich in histamine are the Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir have become very popular, but on the other hand, for people that are sensitive, they can actually present a problem. Some unfortunate people do get headaches when they drink champagne. Well, it seems a bit strange because champagne is not a red wine, it's a white wine. So how come it can cause headache? Well, again, because of histamine, because as we will see, champagne is a blended wine, but actually it is made among other things with the red grape Pinot Noir. We'll look at this in more details later on.